How's the weather in Assam now? I grew up in Guwahati, by the way. I grew up in Rajgarh, Pupkhornia, that area.
Oh, okay.
It's very pleasant actually now. It's not too hot, not too cold.
Yeah, I'll be there in June. I was supposed to be there in December, but because of COVID, we postponed it. Yeah.
Do you usually come for a longer duration, or is it usually a short visit?
Well, nowadays it's tough, but now that I have an India team, this time I think I'll stay there for probably more than 3 weeks because Mumbai is where we have our team. So I'll go to Mumbai for a week and then rest of the time stay in Guwahati, and want to take my kids to Kaziranga this time. So
That's great.
Okay, sir. Okay. I think we can start. It is already live. Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, we can start, I think.
Okay. Cool. So yes. So good morning, everyone. And we, on behalf of AI, we are absolutely delighted to have Bhaskar Deka, who is currently a Senior Vice President and Global Head of Products and AI at EdCast. It's a pioneering Silicon Valley startup funded by top-tier VC firms like SoftBank and Melno Ventures. And in his 25 years of career, Bhaskar has successfully built, a lot of billion-dollar software product lines, both in public companies and very successful startups. And prior to EdCast, he was the Senior Vice President and founding Head of Product Management and Data Science at Scopus. Bhaskar, I'm slightly new to some of the terms and popular terminology. So if I pronounce something wrong, please let me know either in the chat
Absolutely.
or just let me know. And he's also an advisor to multiple startups in the AI and machine learning space, and is originally from Guwahati. Bhaskar holds a Bachelor of Engineering and Computer Science and Engineering from Birla Institute of Technology, and a master's degree in computer engineering with specialization in AI and expert systems from Boston University, and an MBA from Kellogg School of Management. And from all of this introduction, we know that we cannot have anyone better than Bhaskar to talk to us about AI and machine learning and how they have gone mainstream, and everything that we are going to listen from him today. And also he now lives in Palo Alto. I hope I'm getting the pronunciation correct here. And he lives with his wife and kids with a Havanese puppy. Bhaskar, sometime we would love to see your puppy too. I'm just secretly hoping he just walks around while we have the talk. And Bhaskar also plays tennis, biking, and also he plays the guitar when he gets some free time. I have no idea how he manages to get so much free time to do everything. It's like a superpower, but really, really looking forward to hear from you. I'll let you take over.
Yeah, thank you so much for the warm welcome. It's great to be here, and I'm so glad that what I heard from Sisir, Pamir, Sasanka, and team about what you guys are doing with AI. So super excited to be here, and thank you for that kind introduction. So let me go ahead and start sharing my screen now. Let me know if you guys are able to see it. Are you able to see?
Yes.
Okay, super.
Yes, perfect.
Well, great. Again, thank you for having me. It's evening for me here and morning for you. So what I thought I'll cover is, you did a great introduction. Thank you for that. Maybe talk a little bit about a few companies that I worked for before. And then I would like to talk about how we are seeing AI ML, especially in the enterprise software space. A lot has obviously been seen in the likes of Google and Amazon and so forth, how the backbone of what they do is actually built on AI and machine learning. But I'll talk about what it means for big businesses. And that's where my current company plays in. I'll talk a little bit about types of machine learning and AI that's getting more traction. And then finally, I would like to talk a little bit about what does it mean to be a product manager when unlike an engineer where you're maybe a machine learning engineer or data scientist, what does it mean when you're actually envisioning a product and, whether it's Amazon Alexa or self-driving car and what kind of skills that you need to look for. I would like it to be very interactive. So try to cover everything within 45 minutes and then hopefully, open up for questions in the end. So with that, I think, Amir did a great job already talking about my background. I actually grew up in Guwahati, so I'm originally from Assam, and I came here for my master's, and then since then I've been here 25 plus years now. And some of the companies I work for outside of, more AI-related startups lately, I was at Oracle for a long time, both in engineering and product management, and also Informatica, which is a data integration company. Again, the backdrop of, or the backbone of a lot of AI work. As a product guy, here are my favorite products. Taylor Guitar is one I love, and Nest. I'm a design-centric person, so I love how they simplified the thermostat, and I have one in the back of my wall here. And obviously, as a long-timer at Oracle, fan of the Oracle product. And Dyson vacuum cleaner, this is one of my favorite, about how James Dyson built 5,000 plus prototypes before he had this groundbreaking work. If you're interested, there's a fascinating story in the Inc. magazine, how he almost lost his life savings and even his marriage because he was tinkering and in his shade in the backyard, before coming up with this amazing product. So given that, I also want to talk a little bit about what we do at EdCast, because I will show a bit of a product as well, because you will know how in real enterprise, how AI is becoming so pervasive. So we are funded by top tier VCs like Menlo Ventures and SoftBank. And in our roster of customers, we have, from Google's of the world to Honeywell, and many companies in between. So about 300 enterprise customers that uses our product. And we are really, the way we position ourselves is, you can think of us as the Spotify of learning. You have a lot of content, whether it's on the available internet, whether it's Coursera, Pluralsights of the world, or you have content which is inside their organization where people are building materials. But it's really hard for an employee within an organization to figure out if she wants to move from software engineering to product management, how would she, figure out the right kind of information or content or training materials that will help her in that. So we provide that solution by applying a lot of AI and machine learning. So similar to Netflix or Spotify, where the system knows that what kind of music you like or what kind of movies you like, what kind of people you follow who like that kind of music, and based on that, give you the right playlist or recommendation. We do a similar thing, but our mission is to do upskilling for that employee. So and the example I gave about someone moving from one job role to another one, or maybe looking for a promotion, and what kind of content and training or certifications or credentials she would need, that's where we come in, and we are trusted by some of these big names. We also partner a lot with major government or initiatives like, and I'll talk a little bit about Future Skills in India, which is what we deliver as a backbone, as well as World Economic Forum. We are about 450 plus employees worldwide now. In fact, I'll be visiting next week our European team, where we have a fairly decent sized team, as well as a lot of customers there. And our customer base is kind of all over. We also have a office in India where we are hiring. So if you know some good talents who are interested, we'll be happy to look at that as well, both on the engineering as well as product side. So one quick one I wanted to talk about also is Future Skills. If you're familiar with it, it's a Government of India initiative. It is driven by NASSCOM, the Association for Computer Companies in India. And over the last 3 years, we've actually built the backbone or the system that NASSCOM provides to the end user. So even though our products are mostly around B2B, this is one example where we do both B2B as well as B2C. If you haven't signed up for it, I highly encourage it. It's actually a pretty good way to learn new technologies through this platform. So given that background about myself and the company I work for, let's dive in now and talk about some of the trends, as well as where we finally see machine learning. As a quick background, again, when I did my master's more than 25 years ago in AI, at that time it was AI expert systems, but there was really no job. It was going through what was known as AI winter. And fast forward, 15 years, back in 2010 or so, when the next big wave of AI happened, now it's at a point, it's especially in Silicon Valley here, it's so hard to find good machine learning engineers, data scientists, or ML product managers because the demand is so high. So Andrew Ning, if you haven't taken his Coursera course, which I actually did myself, along with I sent my team, and I happened to meet him once at Stanford, this is his quote about the fact that AI is the new electricity. And in that vein, you can see that how AI is bringing the new industrial revolution. They call the fourth industrial revolution, starting with the steam engine and then how computers came about. But now with AI, and especially machine learning, it is becoming so pervasive that, again, going back to 2010, it was primarily more in the consumer space now, but you see more and more enterprises are not only embracing it, but demanding that you have AI-based solution around it. So one of the ways to look at the future trends is, at research firms like Gartner, who would look at and talking to a lot of enterprises as well as a lot of software vendors, trying to figure out where are we going in the AI space. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how Gartner sees it for both from AI standpoint, as well as for machine learning, which is a subdomain within AI. Now, when it comes to AI itself, what Gartner definitely has found is that as enterprises are accelerating their digital transformation, so bear in mind that with the internet, there has been a push for digital transformation for since the beginning of the 2000. There have been a big push about digital transformation. With AI coming into the play, there actually been more driver around it, especially when you're taking the data-driven, whether it's decision-making or making more insights around it. So AI has really helped them accelerate into it. The other thing around that is that, the precursor to AI, which would be, big data and availability of a lot of different types of data sets, really made it possible for you to have AI-driven initiatives. The reason I told my personal story about, AI and expert systems, at those days, 25 years ago, even if you had really good models of machine learning that you wanted to do, the computing power wasn't there, or it was too expensive, and then the storage, the way the data you needed to be able to run good statistical modeling wasn't quite available at that time. So the confluence of data being available and cheap storage, the confluence of computing power being readily available and cheap, and as well as more readily available through the cloud, made it all possible for AI to be where it is now. Now, as you are looking at how AI is being used as the electricity, as Andrew talks about, there are multiple facets of things that are coming around. And one of them, which I'll talk about later on, is responsible AI. There are questions about AI ethics, and as we're building, especially for the enterprise, are there things that you need to be careful about, whether if there is any bias in the system that might discriminate people, one type of people against another. So those are all some of the trends. So I definitely encourage you to look at this kind of hype cycle from Gartner or other research analysts, which talks about where you might see things moving in the next 2 years versus 2 to 5 years versus maybe 10 years or so. One of the other things kind of related to that is what is the priority metrics, and then the priority metrics kind of shows what are things which might be, again, high in the priority list for enterprises versus what are some of the things that, even though they're transformational, might be coming in the next 5 years versus 10 years. Now, investment in AI as well as research in AI remains very high. You see pretty much every day here, companies getting funded by the VCs as well as enterprises either absorbing a company, buying one, and so forth. So adoption of AI is very high. Now, there are very different sections of, or very different subsets within that AI that you can see. I'm just showing some of the examples here. For example, autonomous vehicle, there was a lot of excitement around it, and I'll talk about autonomous vehicle a little bit further down. But there have been quite a bit of setbacks as well. I mean, it hasn't been as readily available as people have thought. So something like autonomous vehicle is definitely more than 10 years away. And if you're following the AI field, and if you think about, the AI having the similar kind of or close to capabilities of humans, where AGI comes into play, that's definitely, more than 10 years away, right? That, as we can see. But there are many of the other elements here that you will see that not only machine learning in its current form, or deep learning in its current form, or computer vision, the advancements there has been, it's just phenomenal from what it was in a few years ago versus what it is now. So I think the development of whether it's different applications would be, just go from where it is to in an exponential form in some of these areas over the next few years. Now, if you think about the landscape itself, and again, this slide talks a little bit about how it's all comes together, especially around operations, applications, and the technologies. But one thing in particular I wanted to talk about, if you haven't been looking at, is how graph databases have really become more and more relevant and in the AI space. Now, as you know that, and I highly encourage you to look at the AI research, the blog that Facebook has. Some of the great materials come out of there. Obviously, Facebook AI team has some of the best thought leaders in this field. But you'll find that, especially in Facebook, which is all about the human networking that you need and the representation of that, being able to use something like that in a more of a multidimensional way, as well as the different relationships that you need to build outside of standard two-dimensional relation modeling, that has become very common as well. I cannot say a lot of details about how we use it, but I just want to say that even in our company, about 18 months ago, we started investing in graph database and using a lot of the user interaction data along with other data that we have, and it's paying enormous dividends. So whether it's using for supervised learning or using for clustering techniques or semi-supervised learning, it is fascinating what you can do with graph database. And some of the examples of graph database, if you want to look up more, one of them is Neo4j, the other popular one is ArangoDB. But in general, I just want to call that one out by saying, as you look at the different the areas of AI, you'll find that some of these areas, whether it's knowledge graph or even synthetic data or transfer learning, is becoming quite mainstream. Transfer learning is another one where if you're following the robotics field, you'll find how, once you have trained one arm of a robot, say left arm of the robot, you can transfer the learnings that you had there to the right arm without having to do, starting from scratch. So some of these areas are interesting to keep an eye on. And if you haven't yet, so I would definitely encourage you to look at some of these areas like graph database. Now, I talked about more from the AI as a general field. As you know, that the popularity of AI is driven a lot by the subfield of it, which is machine learning and especially data science. And again, at the risk of repeating it, data science is really where you get some of the AI techniques, but you marry it with a lot of business concepts around it. So data scientists are typically, the people who would be coming up with the right model to choose from based on the business domain data that you're looking at. Whereas machine learning engineers are taking some of this and then building, whether it's the actual implementation of it or some data engineering aspect as well. So some of the trends that we are seeing in this area in particular, one of them is that the democratization of both data science and machine learning, which has become, again, if you look at big enterprises, everywhere you will see how many data scientists they need and machine learning engineers. So that has become what they call the DSML. It has become available to more people now. It's not used to be in the engineering field anymore. Even the power user, corporate developers within the enterprise, they have become kind of quite common. And then the other thing is, because of that being used for industrial strength or in mission critical applications now, the operational aspect of it has become quite common. Now I'll talk a little bit about ML ops in particular further down my presentation. But as you are learning or as you're looking at machine learning in particular, one of the things you want to look at quite a bit is to operationalize it, the field of ML ops, how that's evolving. In fact, that's one area where still a lot of enterprises run into some trouble because of overlooking that because it's not the same as the way you would do deployment of regular code, right? And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So when it comes to priority in this particular area, which is machine learning and data science, and some one that I want to talk out in particular is outside of MLOps, the prescriptive analytics is one area where we are seeing a lot of demand because typical analytics up until now has been a lot about what happened and why it happened, but the prescriptive one or a predictive one is about what might happen and a lot of simulation around it. So both MLOps and Auto ML, which is being able to generate ML models by itself based on the data, is going to see quite a bit of development over the next 2 to 5 years is one of the predictions around it. Now, if we take that aside and think about what the global AI market is going to look like, it is actually fascinating. Up until now, I think the compounded annual growth rate of the AI market itself has been around 28% or so. But the projection is that by 2025, it will reach about $170 billion market, which is huge, with annual growth rate of 35%. Given that context, I'm going to take a step back and think about, since my focus in this talk is more about enterprise, and just to clarify again, enterprise means how big businesses, whether it's, let's say, if I give example from India, let's say Tata Group or, HDFC, one of the banks, how they would be looking at using AI. So enterprises are those big companies, and we EdCast, we primarily play in that space. So consumer, on the other hand, would be how you'd be using Google and Facebook and so forth. So about let's say 20, 25, or even 30 years ago, it used to be such that innovation that happened in the computer space used to be more inside the four walls of an enterprise. So if you think about the early days of computing, the mainframe, those were big boxes that very few people have access to, and then innovation from there started going into personal computer, going to laptop and so forth. So, but the innovation lab, if you will, was the enterprise, and from there it came to the consumer. So, I remember having the first laptop once I moved here, but back in home when I was there, we had computer in school, but I didn't have a personal computer at that time. But over time, then it moved to having a laptop, and my son now has a phone, which has more computing power than my laptop back then. So that trend, moving from enterprise to consumer, has quite reversed now. So when it comes to AI, one of the things to come in mind is that innovation actually came from consumer back to enterprise. So if I look at these four areas here, Amazon, that you see that in Amazon, you get recommendation. You bought this book, then people who bought that book also bought this similar book. Or if you go to Netflix, the same story. They are looking at what kind of movies that you're watching, and then based on similar people who might be looking at thrillers or drama, giving you a recommendation around it. Spotify is the same way, building playlists based on genres of music, or Google giving you, similar recommendation. So that level of investment in AI in the consumer companies actually started quite some time back. In fact, if you are interested, if you go back and look at the recommendation engine that Amazon built, there's actually a paper way back from 2003, which we looked at when we were building our recommendation engine. And it's fascinating that 2003, the kind of work that they were doing. And then Netflix, the same way. If you look at, if you search for Netflix $1 million prize, back in, I believe, 2008 or so, they didn't, for a prize to improve the collaborative filtering, and somebody with a matrix factorization won that prize. So that kind of, investment or innovation in consumer, that's now coming to enterprise. And in fact, this is where I want to show a little bit and talk a little bit about our product. So since I said our product helps somebody who's in an organization to meet their learning goal and then also move from maybe one job role to another one based on learning, one of the big things that we do is provide a recommendation engine similar to the way you see recommendation on Amazon or Google. In our case, though, it's about, based on what learnings what goal I have, and then providing recommendation on that. And the way we do that is, and I can tell you all the details on the underpinnings of it, but we use a lot of similar concepts that are used in the likes of Google and Amazon, which is having a hybrid filtering. And the hybrid filtering in a recommendation engine means that we use both content-based filtering, which is if I liked one kind of content, then I look for similar attributes of a content similar to that. And then I know that if I liked this kind of book on data science, then I'll probably would like this other kind of books on data science as well. So that's the content-based part. And then the collaborative part is understanding where do I belong from a social learning perspective. So me within an organization, I'm part of a department. Let's say I'm a product manager within a department. Then there are other product managers who might be similar to you, my background. So that's one attribute that I know that I'm similar to this person. Then other thing could be that I have similarity because we belong to the same group or we follow the same channel and so forth. So having that aspect of collaboration, collaborative filtering along with content-based is how you build what is known as hybrid filtering. And that gives us the personalized, contextual, relevant, and timely content back to me as a learner. Obviously, a lot goes behind the scene, and we use similar techniques like matrix factorization that I talked about for that was used in Netflix, as well as a lot of deep learning techniques, because you are not only looking at attributes which are very explicit in nature. Like I said, I know that I belong to this department, another person belongs to another department, so I have the similarity. But sometimes, using deep learning techniques, you can understand what is known as latent variables, which is not evident directly, but you know that two people can be similar even though by regular attributes you're not able to see that they're similar. In fact, we use a technique called attribute-aware matrix factorization, which you can look up as well. And we also use techniques called neural collaborative filtering, NCF, which is another recent development in the last 3-4 years or so. So with that kind of backbone, which is learnings from the consumer world, but making it more adaptive to our environment, is how we build our engine. So I wanted to give you an example of that. Now, yeah, and you are probably already familiar with how then the product has been, but I wanted to, maybe for newer folks, I want to give a sense of how do you then build this product. So the anatomy of then the machine learning product is that the first thing you need to do is you need to understand what model that you will be using right in the middle, right? So for example, in our case, we knew that we will be building a recommendation engine. So we have a reference model of how Netflix or Spotify does it. And I talked about collaborative filtering, different kind of techniques that you can reuse there. So you have, the notion of a model. And then you need a lot of clean data, which would be whether activity data, like, what kind of content do I normally consume? What department do I belong to, and such. And in our case, it's not only just the learner's profile and activity, but also skill is super important, because you want to know that if I want to move from software engineering to product management, what kind of skills do I need? Do I need I need some communication skills, which was not as important maybe in software engineering, but now in product management I would have. I need some business strategy skill and so forth. And these are not simple labels. That there is an actual ontology or taxonomy behind it, and these skills kind of relate to each other. So you need that kind of definition of skill, and that's another one, at least in the context of our product, we have that. So you need that process of understanding what data you need and how you clean that data, and you'll feed it into the model. Then you'll be doing some testing with that model. You will actually look at it and say, what kind of predictions am I getting? If I predict that this user is going to like this content, did the user actually interact with it? And if not, then you know that my prediction wasn't right. So you go through that, you kind of go through a good cycle of testing. And then once you are comfortable, then you will finally, deploy it in production. And I'll talk a little bit about the deployment itself. But this whole process is a very iterative process. And the other thing you want to keep in mind is that there is no one-size-fits-all model. In fact, my previous startup, before EdCast and Scoopos, we built sales forecasting models or product. And what we found there was that depending on the type of product that I'm forecasting the sale for, I sometimes have to use a different model. So if you're familiar with machine learning models, we used a combination of LSTM, which is a type of recurrent neural network model, as well as we used Bayes model, and in some cases, just simple predictive models, depending on the type of product. And in our case, I can give an example where we were having different flavors of ice cream that, some very popular ones versus some maybe only comes once in a while and is seasonal in nature. And what our data told us is that we couldn't use LSTM for all types of data. In some cases, the data was very sparse in nature. We actually had to use a Bayes model. So that's another thing to keep in mind, that even though, in a classical sense, you might think, I'm going to go forecasting and I'm okay with computationally intensive models like LSTM. Let's go ahead with that. But you'll find that your data will be giving you signals where you have to make a fork and say, for this type I use this model and other one. And all of that will come together in your as you're doing your hypothesis testing and putting it in the deployment. Now, the reason I want to talk a little bit about deployment, this is one area where you find that when you transition from academics to production in a code in an enterprise, whether it's in an enterprise or a software company, that this area could come in as a surprise for you. In our case, for example, when I have to think about my model or my product being deployed in 300 major customers, whether it's Google or Novartis or NASCOM in case of the Future Skills Prime, these might have their own separate flavors of it. And the products are typically, even though they're cloud-based product, can be configured depending on one type of customer instance, another one. So when it's come to machine learning deployment, you have this additional challenge, because when you have a regular code when you're deploying, you're getting the code and you're still doing a lot of what is known as CI/CD pipeline to move through it. But here you have additional challenges, because you have to think about the code, you have to think about the model, and you also have to think about the data. So this is one area which is a little bit overlooked, and that's why ML Ops has become very popular lately. And ML Ops is one area where you're probably seeing quite a bit of innovation lately, as well as monitoring how the models are performing and so forth. Martin Fowler, who was kind of a thought leader in software engineering, in particular, even before, he wrote quite a, I think, couple of books on object-oriented programming as well. This is the example that I'm using here. He has a pretty good deployment model, how you do end-to-end machine learning deployment. I put the reference here at the bottom. Definitely, you can look at it. But I would highly encourage that as you're thinking about and you're looking at various aspects of machine learning, do think about deployment as an area where don't think about it as an afterthought, because production-worthy product with the AI backbone especially calls for really good understanding of the deployment model. So I'm going to switch gear a little bit and talk about, what I talked about is examples of where we're making really great inroads, like whether it's recommendation engine, the example I gave, or sales forecasting. Those are real products that I build or I'm building with my team. But the other one, which is fascinating, is the self-driving car. And I actually live very close to Google campus. In fact, Waymo, which is an offshoot of Google, I see Waymo in my neighborhood all the time. I've been seeing that for 5 years now. And the self-driving cars or autonomous cars are interesting because here's the standard model of how you go from no automation to full automation, right? And there has been a lot of debates and a lot of discussions around what is fully automated or not. But given the spectrum of where you want to go, one area that where the AI and machine learning comes in is this computer vision part, and it is quite, lack of a better term, it's a hard job because, and if you think about when you're driving your car, we as human brain, the kind of split-second decisions we make, whether it's when something is flying by suddenly in front of us, is it a plastic paper or it's actually your neighborhood cat, there's a lot involved there, and this is just an quick snapshot of how do you do perception, localization, all the way to to figuring out the trajectory. But if you think about that being in one extreme, and I think one of my earlier slides I talked about the autonomous car, as much as my son jokes with me that unlike my daughter who got a driver's license recently, he probably won't need it because by the time self-driving car would be a reality, but it's still, we are still a bit away from it, right? So even though there's been a lot of advancements in computer vision and so forth, but now take the same thing and think about certain areas of computer vision and AI, and then think about what's happening on the medical field. I spent about 4 years in Pfizer, so have a little bit of understanding of image processing and how, back in 2005 when I was there, we were still struggling with, a lot of decisions around it. But now with the computer vision techniques, there's been great advancements in that field. How they can figure out by looking at an image, like the way a radiologist would look at and say whether it's potentially cancerous or not. In 15 years from when I last looked at versus what it is that you can do with AI or ML is fascinating. So this is another area where on one extreme, there may be self-driving car, we are a bit away. But the application of computer vision in areas like image processing in medical field is a reality, and there are a lot of startups doing some very interesting work in that space. So let me now end with just talking about I kind of painted a picture of where the trends are and give you a couple of examples of product. Now I'm going to take a step back and talk about what is an AI product manager. Here, this one is an interesting take on what a modern data scientist is, and you can see that it's a multi-domain field, and there's some, math, statistics, all the way to communication and visualization skill. When you think about an AI product manager, for folks who might not be very familiar with product managers are really the ones who would envision a product. Like my very first slide when I talked about, maybe the Dyson vacuum cleaner. So Dyson was, in addition to being an engineer, he was a product manager too. So he was thinking about what kind of product he will build along with what kind of market that you will position this product about. So there's an aspect of business and there's an aspect of technology associated with it. And then you will work with engineers who will be actually building it for you. So to be an AI product manager, I just highlighted 3 major skills that you would need to get into that field. One obviously is that data fluency, and again I'm quoting Andrew Ng's quote here. That if 80% of our work is data preparation, then ensuring data quality is the most important work of a machine learning team. So when the engineers, ML engineers and data scientists, when they are working on finding the right solution for the problem space, what they look at the product manager is to have very solid grasp on the data. I'll give example from the sales forecasting one that I talked about earlier. One of the things we looked at was not only seeing historical data about how things sold before. So if you want to look at the ice cream, how they are selling, you want to look at the seasonality and say, last year in July, I had this kind of sales from the same location. But then the product manager had to think about not only that kind of, straightforward extrapolation based on historical data, but kind of think out of the box and say, what else does influence the sales of in a particular retail location? So in our case, for example, we said, if you have a retail location which is close to a stadium, and that stadium holds either some concerts or some football game every once in a while, then when those games happen, would there be foot traffic to that location, and then how would it influence the sales? So for that, then you need some kind of data around the events that might be happening. You might look at the same time, you might look at weather forecasting, because if it's going to be a hot day, maybe people will buy more ice cream. So that kind of external data set outside of the standard data set that you have for your regular historical data becomes very important for the product manager to think about. And your data scientists and your machine learning engineers would expect that the product manager is thinking through all of that data space, if you will. So data fluency is a super important skill. And then understanding the different types of machine learning models or algorithms that are out there. So supervised, semi-supervised, unsupervised, or reinforcement learning, very important to understand kind of the differences and the similarities between them. Truth be told, a lot of work right now happening in the enterprise world is still within supervised and unsupervised learning space. In fact, more on the supervised space than even unsupervised. You see more work in reinforcement learning in space of robotics, and then you see that may be an area. But again, things are changing. Even at Scoopos, we were experimenting with reinforcement learning and how that will help in the whole forecasting model, because the whole notion of agent and the reward system actually made quite a bit of sense around it. But again, as a product manager, it's very important to understand the different types of machine learning that you're dealing with. In the same vein, then within that, you need to understand the differences between types of machine learning, right? So what would you would do? Where would you use regression? For example, when you're doing a continuous predictive values like housing price, maybe based on the square footage of the house, the number of bathrooms or bedrooms that you have, versus my earlier example about looking at an image and figuring out whether it could be potentially cancerous or not. But really understanding that is very important. So that's another very important skill to have. And then if you want to break into the product space, it is super important to have the domain knowledge around it. So if you're self-driving car product manager, then understanding that what is involved within the driving a car, with the different parts involved. If you're building a sales forecasting tool for retail, like the example I gave earlier, then understanding the retail landscape, what kind of retail locations are there, what's the typical sales volume and so forth. But just fully understanding the domain is very important. It's then a standard question about, do you really need technical degree or background to be an AI product manager? I have my bias because I come from the engineering background and technical background myself. What I have seen is that, especially in a field like AI, which is still evolving and is very technical background driven, it definitely helps to have. In fact, some of the best AI product managers I've seen is who were machine learning engineers or scientists before, but then moved into being AI product manager. I would say that you don't necessarily need an engineering degree, but I would highly encourage doing what I mentioned earlier, Andrew Ng's machine learning course. It's a classic, as well as a deeplearning.ai. There's a series of I think 4 or 5 courses that you have under deeplearning.ai. I'm looking at the time. I think I'm pretty. Yeah. So let me pause there and for any questions. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was like such a wonderful talk, and I think all of us were like just with open mouths just listening to you silently. But we do have a few questions, and I'm gonna read them out if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So first question is by Sishir, who is and he's asking, how do you handle the concept drift in your company, and what are the tools we have for MLOP's integration?
Yeah, so MLOps is, as I said, it's a evolving field. There are actually different tools available as well. I mean, Facebook has open source some tools. I'm forgetting the name. That Google has some as well. Netflix actually has done as well. So there are different tools available. One of them is called MLflow. I think there's another one, I believe, called Michelangelo. So more than the tool, though, I think what you want to look at is just having the rigor and the discipline around thinking. One of the slides I talked about data, code, and the model. Having that paradigm shift is very hard, because typically engineering, we are mostly used to doing, here's code and then to go through continuous integration and continuous deployment model. But now that you put data and model in place, it's a bit different. So first thing to do is to have the discipline rigor, and then the tools can come on top of it. The tools are evolving, but I would say, having that discipline and understanding is very important first.
Thank you. Sishir, does that answer your question? Do you have anything to add?
No, I think it is fine. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thank you. I will go to the next question, which is by Azhar. And he is asking, referring to Gartner Hype Cycle, If you could tell us if this trend is common to most new technologies or it is specific to AI. If this trend could be attributed to AI journey alone, what could be the possible reasons? And is it lack of understanding of technology or market that causes things like inflated expectations or disillusionment?
Yeah, that's a great question, Azhar. So Gartner actually does this hype cycle for many different fields. So AI, this is not only for AI, the whole notion of hype cycle, they do it for analytics, even for enterprise applications, like, even classic ones like ERP, CRM, and so forth. And the reason behind the hype cycle is that even when you have a really awesome innovation that comes in with direct value to the business, the adoption doesn't happen overnight. I mean, if you think about it, internet itself, by the time it became a household thing or for the mobile phone and so forth, it does take time for adoption to happen, and it's kind of human nature because your change is hard. So what Gartner tries to predict is that what the adoption would look like. And the second thing they look at is, and that's why it's called a hype cycle, sometimes you have these promising technologies which are really great from a tech perspective, but that doesn't really have great business value. And so when you layer the two, what you find is that some things will fizzle out because it didn't have enough business value around it. Some things, although it might take time, will eventually have more staying power because it has the business value. So my short answer to your question is it's not only limited to AI or machine learning. They actually publish it for many different areas as well.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. That was yes. Azhar, do you want to add something, or did that
I
answer?
think you answered it like beautifully, sir. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Thank you. And the next question is from Nagraj. And I personally thank Nagraj for asking this question because this is something even I wanted to know. And I personally struggle with all the time. So he's asking, data labeling is important for machine learning. Even though we can do some level of automation, manual labeling is required, and it is a very boring task. So
Yeah.
how do you make this interesting for labeling engineers? How do you, basically, I think he means, how do you make this interesting? Like a solution to this problem.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's a hard one, and it is, there is no easy answer to it. Let's just start there. Let me give an example for from my own product, right? So one of the tasks we have is labeling or classifying content to a particular skill. So let's say you have a document that came in, and it might say, 21 days to become a great data scientist, something like that. So yeah, by looking at that, I could make some inference about, it's about data science, data scientists, and so forth. But unless I really go through it, it'll be hard for me to do the classification of what skills should I map it to. It's even harder to me to say whether it's at beginner level, intermediate level, or advanced level. So the reason I want to give this example is that any kind of labeling, you can do automation to a certain level, and you can even do AI on top of it. You can do the labeling itself can become a ML model, right? That what you learn from whether you're doing the labeling right or not. So I have personally seen that human in the loop is the best model for it, because beyond a certain point, it's hard to do labeling all the time. It's even harder when you're dealing with labeling for say, when you're extracting information from an image and so forth. So what I'm saying is that there is no easy answer. There are some, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Label Box was one of the startups here in the Silicon Valley where they got quite a bit of funding, which we were trying to do some automation around it. But again, I think that's an area where I think more work is happening, but there will always be time where you would need some level of human labeling beyond what you can do as automation.
I actually, Nagraj, do you want to add something? I don't know if he's in the meeting, but I think, yeah, I think that very beautifully answers the question. It also helps me. And I just want to add something, actually. I recently got to know about this project called Project Karya. And I've been a fan of that project ever since, and I actually work with them a little bit. And since I come from a language background, so what Project Karya does is it's in collaboration with Microsoft Research India. And what they do is they outsource this data labeling and data collection, like, the kind of work which takes more time than than a lot of brain power. So these kind of work to a lot of some of the rural population who are still struggling to find immediate well-paying job, or some people who might be are not able to do physical work. They might be I don't know what's the politically correct term for it, but physically challenged people, or someone who is struggling with hearing ability or something. So they outsource these work to them and get some good amount of data that way, which, like, it also pays them something to, and introduces them to digital work, which is something most of the time they are not aware of even.
Actually, I'm fascinated by it. How do you spell the name? That makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Yes, it's Project Karya, Karya.
Oh, Karya as in work, right?
Work, yes, right.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Yeah, actually, my nephew works for Microsoft Research in India, and I'll find out more. You said it's sponsored by Microsoft Research?
Yes, actually, I'm also working with one of the co-founders now, and I'm also working with Microsoft Research India right now. So that's how I got to know about them. And like, anytime we have a AI data related solution, we have Karya. Like, so I've been such a fan of that. And also, you have a satisfaction that like all my life, because I've been like in a more research oriented field, I have always struggled with, I feel bad to go to people and ask them, like, can we get some data annotated, or because I feel like it's something they would not want to do. But now, like, this whole approach is taking, like, instead it looks like, I'm also helping someone who is probably doing this work. So that gives like a lot of relief.
That's fascinating. Yep. Thank you for sharing that. I'll look it up.
Thank you. I'll share the link with, the link with you.
Yeah.
Pamir, I think you can take Nagraj asked another 2 questions. You can together, I think you can take that.
I just saw your, sorry, I was not on the YouTube. Yes, so second question is from Nagraj, and then I'll go back to Orchid's question. So Nagraj's second question is, data quality is super important to get accurate model. Can you list some of the automated tools for ensuring data quality?
Yeah, so data quality actually, let me talk a little bit about the evolution of that. I work for Informatica, as I mentioned earlier. And so this is, I would say, the pre-big wave of ML that happened in the last 10 years. So at that time, data quality was kind of in a product space itself. So you would have data integration, which was like the ETL kind of product, and you have data quality. which together would make some area for making it ready for data warehouse, where you do a lot of predictive analytics and so forth. What has happened with especially with the ML field is now there is called the data prep tool. So if you look at some of the examples, in fact, one of my ex-Informatica colleague had built a company called Trifecta, which recently got bought by another company. So you have tools like that. You have tools which are available within Amazon AWS itself, or these cloud providers, and then you have tools within Google Cloud, which also OEMs your Trifecta kind of tool. So there are different kind of tools like that. And the other one comes to mind is Trillium. I don't know if they got bought by some, but data quality, whether it's doing simple checks like address or PIN code and so forth checks, or similar ones, or in our case here, validity of some phone numbers and so forth. Those tools are there in the market, but your job really is sometimes outside of what a tool can do. You might have to build your own logic around it. So as part of data engineering, that's actually quite an interesting field where whether you're looking at things like near-time data, and then how do you do to like a Kafka, a bus, and so forth. Doing proper data quality on top of it, you would need both existing tools as well write your own custom code around it. Hopefully that answers your question, Nagras.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. Yes, I don't see Nagraj in the meeting here, so I'm hoping he will put another question if there is anything he wants to add. I'll move to the next question, which is by Orchid, and he is asking, how do you handle off out of distribution data after deployment?
Yeah, so that one, it varies again on what your model or the final outcome looks like. Because if you're doing for example, sales prediction example I gave, anything that goes out of the distribution, you might find that your predictions are way off, right? And then this is where ML monitoring come in. And as you're monitoring or inspecting your model accuracy, as you drill down, you might find, it's because of not so much the model itself is acting differently, it's because the input data that you gave was out of line. So that will then let you think about, like the example I gave in earlier, where you have certain products which are only maybe popular in a certain part of the year, but the volume is really low, then you don't have enough data to go with, versus maybe the most popular flavors of ice cream. Then it'll make you rethink about the model. So one way of handling it is, once you have done the inspection of the model and you looked at it, taking a step back and saying, am I having the right models, or do I need to rethink the model? The second one could be that, yes, that you have the model right, but you have to do some hyperparameter tuning, that the model itself is fine, but the way you would tweak it would handle that out of distribution data. So it's a combination of things like that. And this is where I believe that doing the inspection and looking backwards is very important.
Thank you so much for your answer. We have another question by Lata ma'am, who is Lata Chaudhary, who is messaging from the US. And the question is, any suggestions on NLP and NLU for AI/ML?
Yeah, so thank you for the question, Lata. We actually use NLP quite heavily. in our product. And I gave example, I think, about classification of document, right? So if you have let's say a PDF document, which is a content for the learner, you can extract metadata out of the title or description, but then to get the rich metadata or keywords out of it, of that document, you would need NLP, right? To do NLP. And in our case, since we support global corporations around the world, we support about 30 different languages, from French all the way to, Indonesian. Those are all separate. So we need NLP not only for one type of language, but for others. Where it becomes very interesting is how do you train your machine learning models, which not only uses NLP for that kind of keyword extraction, but also making sure that the model itself understands the nuances between different languages. Now, that's a very hard problem to solve, even for us right now. We are not quite there yet in terms of saying, I have a French language-based ML model which fully, is aware of the French nuances versus I have a Spanish version of it. So I think where I'm going with this is the classical NLP application of, how we be using for chatbot. I do advise a startup which does chatbot products, and so you're used for automated food ordering and such. So there's one application of NLP around it, the classification piece I talked about. But I think in my personal view, the fascination or the amazing work that will come out of understanding the nuances across languages and then having models which can fit to one language with another is where a lot of additional work will go in.
Okay, sir. Actually, what Sotri ma'am want to ask is that, she is actually working on the healthcare data. Ma'am has has some sentences from the doctors, maybe some diagnosis questions and some tag, how to map those things. What happened is that the problem is that whatever the diagnosis questions are there, those are not clustered. There is no label for them. Okay, now how to two things actually. One is that how to label that data and how we can learn from that without doing any labeling. So because we don't have any kind of label as of now, how to tag that. For one sentence is there, diagnosis questions, and then there will be some tag for that. Some tags are there, some already prescribed, some tags are there. How to tag that? So that is actually one question. How ma'am can do some kind of unsupervised way of doing data labeling or maybe
yeah. I think that's what I was thinking as well. That you would need some level of unsupervised or some kind of clustering technique, which is I'll be happy to take that offline and then
yes,
because I would need to understand the problem space a little bit more, but I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you. Yeah. Pamir, go ahead.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. And I actually wanted to ask you, we are quite over time, and we actually had two more questions in our YouTube channel. So would you like to take them over the comment section later, or would you be able to
No, I'm
handle
fine.
it?
If it's only a couple of questions, I can take those now.
Okay, yeah, I think we have two questions, and I'll just, that will be the last two, I think. So I'll go with Sisir's question, which is, when we start the AI or data science project, after getting the requirements from the business team, which are the questions we should have in that ideation part? Sorry, Sisir, I didn't understand, so I'm just reading on.
Yeah, so, sir, my question is that, when we start a data science or AI project first, so we got we get the requirement from the business team. Now, it may be any like maybe NLP project or maybe speech related projects. So at that time, how like what are the questions we should ask? Because we may not have the data and we may not have that problem formulation at in our hand. So what are the questions we should ask to that business team or the management team? So that's my question actually.
Yeah. So I think
As a data scientist. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think you have the standard questions that you will have related to, what problem that you're trying to solve and who you're solving it for and what success look like, right? So those are irrespective of what's an AI project or a regular project, you need those.
Okay.
When it comes to specific to, if it's a data science project, this is where your understanding of the data becomes very important and the persona you're solving for. Like the example I gave about sales forecasting, we needed to really understand in this case a retail location, what are all the attributes related to the retail location. I gave example of being proximity to maybe a stadium, that will come later, but initially you start thinking about what's the square footage of the one, what kind of aisle space it might have, where the products are placed, are those Pepsi bottles placed close to when a person walks in versus maybe further down. So all of that what kind of data you need, having a good domain understanding is very important. So you need to understand that, what in the end, what you're trying to solve and what type of problem is it? Is it related to forecasting, like the example I gave? Is it related to, recommendation like the game? So if it's a data science related project, you want to box it into the type of problem space it's in. And then you want to get into the types of data. And types of data, you need to think about data that will be available to you, which is called the internal data, as well as data that you might have to get it from outside or even buy. Because sometimes, like in our example, we actually have to buy data from a third-party provider that say the weather forecast data as well as events data, which is what concerts are happening in the neighborhood and so forth. So I think the focus on the classical, the outcome-based questions as well as the data behind this is how you want to go about it.
Okay, thanks. Yeah. Thank you, sir.
Sure.
Yes. So yeah, just one last question, if we can take that. So
Yeah, please.
what are the top skills required for good AI product manager?
Yeah, I think as I said, I'm a little bit biased because I have the engineering and the business background, but I've seen that to be a good AI PM, where because it's an evolving field, it's a newer field, having a good foundation in data and having good problem-solving skills, whether you're coming from engineering or similar background, is important. And then something like an MBA definitely helps because you get to understand the business aspect of it through the various courses you go through. Having said that, if you've been in a certain space where you understand the domain really well, and let's say you have good technical skills, then you can substitute that for having a business degree and so forth. You don't always need a degree. But as I said, I'm biased, but I've seen some of the best AI PMs having a combination of those skills. Either people who were in machine learning engineer, but then had more business exposure coming to that, or the other way around. And I think I also mentioned that you don't have to go to school nowadays to learn some of it. There's so much of good material in Coursera, Pluralsight, or other places. It's really about trying it out. I mean, I get fascinated by the fact that many of these models that statistical models that I learned when I was doing my master's, now you have all of this available and you go to Google, there you will find there's example models that you can run using TensorFlow or Keras, which you can do with a little bit of work with maybe Jupyter Notebook, and models are already available. So trying it out, putting a data set in there, trying it out, maybe looking at what's happening in that Kaggle computation, those are all good things. As I said, I'm biased because that's the background I come in, but it's more important for you to play with it and then having a passion behind it. But you need a combination of good understanding of the problem solving as well as the business sense. That's what makes you a good AI PM.
Thank you so much, Bhaskar. I think we will end the question answer sessions here. And on behalf of AI, we are absolutely happy to have all these amazing topics to discuss, and amazing questions. Thank you everyone for asking all these questions. And in fact, this is, I think, though I have missed a few talks, but this is one of the most interactive sessions we have had here. And thank you so much. I will let Sishir add if he has anything to add.
Yeah, I think it's fine. Yeah, it was an excellent talk, actually, sir. So much of engagement we had this time. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes,
it was a much needed topic.
No, thank you so much for having me. I definitely learned from these questions as well, and happy to, like a couple of people I think had more questions. So here's my contact. You can reach me through LinkedIn or Twitter. I'm not very active in Twitter, but LinkedIn I am. And in fact, that's how Sisir and I got connected. And then the one last thing I want to say is that I did talk about one area recently, especially around AI ethics in one of the podcasts. This is supposed to be one of the top podcasts here in the US, AI and Business podcast. And if you search for it, you will find me talk about it. I think about two months ago, I had a.
This is great.
Yeah.
Thank you for letting us know, because I'm definitely gonna watch this now. And special thank you for giving us your Friday evening.
No problem. Happy to do it. Yeah, it's instead of watching Netflix, I guess I got to talk about Netflix, so which is fine.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Avigyan, you stopped